My family, as well as 250 other families whose loved ones were taken hostage by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad from over 25 different nationalities and 5 different religions, have been fighting to receive knowledge of their loved ones and their fate and their release. I think this is the lowest form of terrorist psychological warfare imaginable. I humbly ask the Security Council members, what kind of human beings take deceased people and use them as negotiation chips? Who denies the deceased the last basic human dignity that they deserve? When my family has been subjected to this deliberate withholding of information about our son's faith, the refusal to return him back to us, the silence, that long silence, has been a form of slow, enduring psychological torture.
That was Ruby Chen speaking before the United Nations Security Council on May 15th. Chen explained that his son Itai had been taken hostage by Hamas during the October 7th attack. Itai was declared dead by the IDF in March 2024, based on intelligence that the military had gathered. But what parent can and will accept that as final, without concrete proof? Hope is their power. In this podcast interview, Ruby and I discussed the hope and support shown to the hostage families by U.S. President Biden and the seamless transition to President Trump and his team. Among them, his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. Ruby Chen has been in the room and on the phone for so many of the intimate and important meetings with senior officials in both administrations. I spoke with Ruby on May 11th. Today, May 28th, is day 600. His son, Itai, remains in captivity. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel, and as soon as I finish recording this introduction, I'm off to a silent vigil at the Sha'ar Negev intersection near the kibbutz where I now live. 600 days ago, Hamas terrorists machine-gunned wildly at every passing vehicle and murdered every living being as they made their way from Sha'ar Negev intersection to the city of Sderot, home to 30,000 residents, where they continued their massacre. Stay with us. So it's just before 4 p.m. in the afternoon. I've just come from Sha'ar HaNegev Junction, spent an hour or so there, standing by the side of the road, holding a yellow flag, talking to people. And if you go to the end of the interview with Ruby Chen, you'll be able to listen to the words of one of the organizers of today's events in Sha'ar Negev. Tonight, of course, there will be many more people attending and some speakers. So I just wanted to let you know that that's coming at the end. Now, we go to Ruby Chen. Sunday, May 11th, 6 p.m. in Israel. Thank you so much for joining State of Tel Aviv this evening.
Thank you for having me.
And you, I believe, you're in Israel at the moment and in central Israel where you live now, correct?
Yeah, I moved over about 25 years ago from New York City. The wife decides where we live, so.
Somebody's got to take charge.
Yeah, my wife, she's the pilot. She's the daughter of a El Al pilot for 40 years. So when I met her, she basically was every place you could think about. And she already made a decision after being with Dad every place, like this is the place to be.
Yeah, and you do have quite an interesting background and nationalities, but we're not here to focus on that, much as it's very interesting and I'd like to. We're here to talk about your son, Itai, who was serving in the IDF on the morning of October 7th on the border with the Gaza Strip. And he was abducted by Hamas. Tell us what you heard, what you knew, what you went through on that day?
Yeah, so Itai, just to put things into context, has a U.S. as well as German citizenship. So at the age of 18, he could basically do anything. But he decided to serve in the IDF as the land of the Jews, and both my family and my wife's family are Holocaust survivors, so he understood the magnitude of doing so. And he joined the tanks division, and he was on the border that morning. We didn't know much until we started seeing the video clips popping up on TV. In the morning, he did talk to his girlfriend, and they kind of spoke and, take care of yourself, love you, those types of things. And what we know in retrospect is that they were mobilized and they did what they were supposed to do, and then some more. And the cavalry never showed up, meaning the IDF reinforcements, as the IDF was totally surprised on that. And their battle ended around 9 o'clock in the morning.
Where
And
exactly was Itai stationed?
it's a base next to the kibbutz Nahal Oz, which is kind of like the center of Gaza. That's where they are. We, the families from our end, Saturday we tried to talk to people that, with a new Itai from the IDF or his commanders, but everyone went, dead silent. We were able to get a hold of the other parents that their kids were in the same squad as Itai in the tank. We were not told anything. After a day, we went to a command center that the police put up for missing people, which is what Itai was at the beginning. And we said, okay, where is he? And according to that command center, it's like, okay, no one physically is able to identify Itai and say he's standing next to me. He's not in the hospitals, and he's not on that list that nobody wanted to be on. And we lived like that for a couple of days. In between, as U.S. citizens, we started to advocate and highlight that he was a U.S. citizen, hoping that it's another shield of protection. We had our first news conference with a few dozen reporters in a hotel in Tel Aviv Tuesday. Wednesday, Secretary of State Blinken came in and wanted to meet us. And Thursday morning, we got a knock on the door. All the three families also getting a knock on the door simultaneously, 6 o'clock in the morning, to notify us that they got to the tank and one of the 4 team members was found killed and down inside of the tank, and the 3 others most likely in Gaza. And that same weekend, we were supposed to celebrate the bar mitzvah of Itai's sibling, and that was a difficult thing to do, but we wanted him to have a happy experience of what he, studied for, and, preparing from the Jewish tradition from a child to an adult. That Friday, before the bar mitzvah, there was a call with President Biden with the U.S. citizens. It was supposed to be a 15-20 minute call. And I know afterwards, as a fact, he had a chopper waiting for him to take him to the next thing on his agenda. He wanted to let us know that there was nothing more important to him than talking to us, and that this is like the number one thing on his agenda. He took ownership on it and wanted to make sure that we understood. After 15 minutes, the aide that wanted to move him on to the next topic told him, Mr. President, we need to wrap it up. And he looked at his aide and he said, last time I checked, I'm the President of the United States. I'll decide when this meeting ends. He stayed on the call for an hour and a half. And it's very unfortunate, but during that call, one of the U.S. Israeli families that was on the phone got another knock on the door, notifying them that their daughter was found and determined is killed. And so we heard the background noise in Hebrew. President, of course, did not understand what was going on. Then he needed to, get a debrief of what happened. And it was more of a group therapy call than anything else. And it's something that I will never forget, for him spending the time and talking to us and saying, if I need to do this call again tomorrow or the next day and every day, that's what I'm going to do.
As someone who was obviously an onlooker, would hear about these events or moments, I was always very struck by his compassion, President Biden's compassion.
I'll say another thing about President Biden, the personal aspect of it. We had a face-to-face meeting, the U.S. hostage families in the White House, a few months into this. And, you sit around the table, you wait for him to come in. Everyone is kind of like, awestruck about seeing the president, which you never, think about it's going to happen to you. And he sits down and he looks at us. We were 10, I think, families. And he could have started any place, right? Like he owns it. And I will never forget what he started. And he looked at us and he said, "There's no shame in asking for help." As someone that also lost a wife and a child, he automatically, was able to not speak as the president of the United States, actually spoke as someone that gets us. And I think he does. And I think that's where his commitment, came from, understanding the magnitude of, what we need to process. And he's like, like a dad speaking to his son and kind of like telling him, "Look, we understand the fight, but you need to, if needed, don't be ashamed to ask for help." He's more than anything he's supposed to human being.
His humanity and his compassion came through, even to someone like me who's very far removed, nowhere near in the room. And I hope that if you're in the room in the future with a president, that it should be under better circumstances than the way you found yourself the first few times. I have to, as you're speaking and talking about the kind of the humanity and really, I guess, down to earthness of President Biden, it strikes me as being very similar to the way in which many hostage families have described Steve Witkoff, President Trump's special envoy for the hostage issue in Israel. Have you had the opportunity also to meet with Steve Witkoff and interact with him in a personal way?
Yes, we have. I'd like to say that first, when the elections were decided, the Biden administration reached out to the new counterparts as soon as possible, explaining to them that this is a bipartisan issue and can't wait till the inauguration to happen. So immediately, Steve and Mike Waltz, Congressman Mike Waltz at the time, bought in to the discussions. That we all remember there was a lot of energy towards getting a deal before inauguration happened. And we had an opportunity to sit with Mr. Witkoff a few weeks into this, me and my wife. And he shared something with President Biden that most people do not know. He also lost a child about a decade and a half ago, overdose. But, when he looked at us and we sat and we started talking, he shared with us, his personal loss as well. And he said to us, basically, "I get you." And my wife looked at him and said, "Well, almost." And explaining that, we live in a different situation where we are more in limbo. Like when he needs to be with his son, wants to be with his son, he has a place to go to. We don't have that, and it can't be a privilege that, if indeed, the news that we got in March 24 was like, he's not going to come back alive, even though there's no evidence and there's no acknowledgement from Hamas whatsoever. Even if the bad scenario is what we're waiting for, it's not done. Because then more than anything, Itai is defined as a hostage. And that hasn't changed for 582 days.
It's a really poignant point that I'm glad you raised, which is that you live, as do all the hostage families, in this kind of surreal zone. I think you yourself have described it as living on another planet in some ways. You're part of this club, if I can put it that way, that nobody wants to be in, which is the hostage families. And we're going to talk a bit more about that. And within that group, you are one of several still who have no hard signs of life of Itai since October 7th. On the other hand, you don't have the converse. And so you're living in this kind of gray zone of hope. Is that fair to put it that way?
Yes, as I try to articulate, what Itai is defined as the other 59 hostages today, as their hostages. And I
Exactly.
think that the media desire to put this into categories comes maybe from a different source. That the cardinal sin was the second week of the fighting, where the Israeli government needed to find a way to negotiate and say to Hamas, okay, what do you want for these hostages? Not just a portion, not a part of them, because anyone that has done negotiations knows two things. One, when you start doing piecemeals, then you're left with the last 10 or the last 20. You'll pay for them much more because of that. And today, there was an announcement today in the Israeli media that a IDF soldier that fought in Lebanon, Syria, 43 years ago, was found. So what does that mean? That we're now waiting for a destiny of 40 years to wait, and you will pay much, much more. Israel paid much, much more. We will never know how many secret operations, how many IDF soldiers were killed to get to this day. So what I'm trying to say is that you will pay much, much more in the future because you're not willing to pay the price today. And I think the Israeli Prime Minister has shown a tendency wanted to pay in the future, even if it's more, because he doesn't want to pay today.
I think that there's much we can criticize about the way things have gone and have not gone probably for the last 19 months. But here we are today. And what you just raised is a really important point, which is this kind of piecemeal release, right? As President Trump put it early on, he said, no more of this 2 here, 3 there, dribs and drabs. We got to get them all out at once. Having said that, even under his watch, the release of 33 hostages over the course of late January until I think the very end of Feb, early March, was again in dribs and drabs. But there's a sense, certainly, that I've felt from coverage and his comments lately that he's fed up. Like, he's really fed up now. I want to go back a bit, though, because it's something I find whenever I speak to someone like you who is in this really incomprehensible position, which is the language we use to talk about the hostages. And I was reading somewhere as I was preparing to talk to you today about you saying there's a special language. It's hostage family language. How can you describe hostage family language? I'll tell you, because I'm not, of course, the parent of a hostage, but it's something I struggle with all the time. I think we all do in our bubbles. How do we, it's so enormous. It's so emotionally and intellectually just overwhelming. What is hostage family language?
Think of visit to Washington, D.C., where you did meetings on the Hill, maybe went into the White House, did some media. After 10 hours, you're exhausted, and at the end of the day, you need to wind down. And I think it's a way just to relieve the tension and, the anxiety. And, if there is, I don't want to call it a blessing, but if there's some comfort, I look at the Golden family, Leah and Simcha, that their son Hadar has been held in captivity as a hostage for over a decade. They walked that journey alone for a long time. And, I also felt for them, but I never went and demonstrated. I never stopped my course of, my daily life. And here we have each other, and they're very gracious, someone that you can learn a lot from. And they themselves have their own language. We talk a bit differently. We listen to things differently. We process things a bit different. And as time passes by, even more so, like, I find it difficult to remember my previous life before October 7th and asking myself, well, in this situation, how would I act and what would I behave?
Yeah, this is, again, something that a number of people have raised. I always like to talk to people about, well, what were you on October 6th? Who were you? Because you all, the families, everybody had a very different identity. And it's something I've heard many times is people say that they just feel that they've become subsumed into this mission, this task, it's a mission, isn't it?
Yeah. And different people come with different attributes. We unfortunately here, compared to the United States had on the State Department a functioning, existing program to support hostages, because they are, at any given moment in time, a few dozen hostages, U.S. hostages. It's called SPIHA, Special President Envoy for Hostage Affairs. But here in Israel, there was something functional, so we needed to establish an NGO ourselves. Basically, we needed to find a professional team that would be willing to support us, and the families themselves took an active positions as well. And here's the difficult thing where, one person's specific background, how does it fit into this new task that we're all looking at? And the majority, come from very different backgrounds. And how do you connect, people's backgrounds to what they could do to be helpful? And everybody wants to contribute. And it was a difficult process to kind of figure it out. So even within the families themselves, it was sometimes challenging. We developed this own type of language amongst us to make us be able to work as a team. But it's not simple.
No, and particularly under such pressing circumstances. What I want to, we've talked a lot about the U.S. and how supportive and engaged the American government has been and was under President Biden as well. How would you describe the level of engagement of the Israeli government? You've indicated already that they didn't have the same kind of sophisticated apparatus set up for negotiating hostage releases and dealing with support for families. And that's one part of it. But then there's also the actual government. And I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable spot in terms of politicizing the discussion, but it's just this elephant in the room, because Prime Minister Netanyahu really has not made a habit of engaging with hostage families or with hostages who have returned. But what's been your experience, or how would you explain the Israeli government's engagement with the families?
Yeah, so it's in stark contrast to what I articulated about President Biden. Before, when he talked to us, he didn't speak as the president, as the person in position. He spoke as a human being. It's unfortunate, but the prime minister, he has many attributes, but that personal connection gene, he just doesn't have it. He doesn't have it. And it was so much needed, to have someone kind of give you that envelope of support, a hug, a phone call. And I think his leadership on that, kind of trickled down to the other cabinet members. And it's highly disappointing, where in the first couple of weeks when we started meeting ministers of the state of Israel, we would get deflection where they would say, oh, hostages, that's not my saying, talk to that guy. And they're like, dude, 1,200 Israelis were killed. You have collective responsibility for
Right.
that. For the 250 families, you have responsibility. How can you tell me, well, that's not my thing? And I think it's a combination of in shock, but also a deep black hole of not knowing what to do and not being able to convey to the families what they are doing. Like the first couple of weeks, like, everyone was in shock from the prime minister down. And, we talked about the need to prioritize the hostages, and that should have been 1A, 1B, and 1C. But, as we know today, in that respect, there were two main missions. One is the dismantling of Hamas, and the other is getting the last hostage out. Not hostages, the last hostage out, which is a pretty big distinction that people typically put their finger on it. And I've always said that the dismantling of Hamas, that's a couple of years to what happened, hostages. And I think that disconnect between the two mission statements, and we were not prioritized. That's the sad fact of the matter, where evidence, has been shown the last 19 months, and even more so the last couple of weeks, with ministers of the Israeli government not being shy about saying, well, there are objectives, but we'll be the hostages is done. Even the prime minister himself said that total victory comes before getting the hostages out. And I think that was the reflection of how the government interacted with us, kind of saying, look, we have other things, which is legitimate. But what was not legitimate, in my opinion, was not looking to us in the eye and saying to us, look, people, very unfortunate, but you are collateral damage, and deal with it. But instead, they gave us the illusion that indeed we are priority number one, and the actions have not shown that. And that disconnect even created even more tension between the families and the government. Again, if the prime minister would have said a couple of weeks into this, look, people, dismantling of Hamas, I need to take care of 9 million people. It's very unfortunate what happened to you folks. I'm very sad about it. I understand my responsibility. I have a bigger responsibility. But he wanted, he wanted to eat the cake and leave it, whole and not. He wanted to get, all the benefits without taking responsibility. And I think for that, he shouldn't be criticized of not being able to say, in a very direct way, what is his priority. On October 7th, 45 U.S. citizens were killed by Hamas. That is the largest single attack on U.S. citizens. If you want to exclude 9/11, you need to go back to the 1980s. And there are today 5 U.S. hostages. And they have a commitment, a legal commitment even, to get U.S. citizens out of harm's way.
I have to raise with you that wedge of nationalities is an issue among the hostage families as a whole, is it not?
And it's a legitimate wedge. But you know what? When at the beginning, or even until today, 190 hostages came out. Nationalities, Russians came out. Thais came out. We had, people coming out that are injured or whatever in different categories. As one said, we have leaned upon to the fact that there are categories. So I don't think my son needs to be penalized for the fact that he is the U.S. citizen. I actually would say to the contrary. When this started, when people understood that he ties the U.S. citizen, they were like, oh, you lucky SOB. He's going to come out in 2-3 week stops. Well, that hasn't been the case. And if now getting him out, any means getting anyone out is possible, I don't care if now, Hamas decides that vegetarians are coming out because they're vegetarians, then yeah, you get them out. And if it's possible to get U.S. citizens because whoever wants to appease the president of the United States coming to the Middle East and there's that opportunity, then hell yeah, I expect that to happen. But everyone listening to this podcast, if you're from Canada, if you're from Europe, United States. So if you care about this topic and you've been listening to us, then I urge you, give your congressman a call. Give your parliament member a call. There are ways to connect to them using a simple email, website, and write to them. I just listened to this podcast and I'm a concerned citizen. And I'd like to ask you, Mr. Parliament member, Mr. Congressman, what have you done today to release these 59 hostages? And I'm going to call you again the next day or the next week, and I'm going to ask you the same question. So making sure that our elected officials understand that this is of a high priority to the people that they represent, and it's a topic that they care about, in order to get this thing done. And having the international community supporting this cause is something that I think would be beneficial to us as well. There's still, unfortunately, money being transferred into Hamas from international entities. It is inconceivable that today Hamas is able to pay payroll to a few tens of thousands of people inside of Gaza. And I ask, where's that money coming from? So just using that as an example, the international community also has its part to play, because for 19 months we haven't gotten this done.
And I think it's time. And let's hope that it does get done. But you're absolutely right. We all have a stake in this. And when I say we all, I speak to anyone in the world, but particularly those of us who have the privilege of living in Western liberal democracies. And we do have a voice and we do have the freedom to speak out. So we should be using it in moments like this. Thank you again so much, Ruby. And I hope good news comes for your family and for the others very, very soon.
We need the last hostage out. We need to get this done.
Yes, we do. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've just left the Sha'ar Negev intersection, which was one of the most violent and horrific spots on October 7th, where there are regular rallies held in support of the hostage families and the hostages. Tonight, it'll be many more people in attendance, but I wanted to get there during the day while they were setting up, and I spoke with Avi Rosenfeld, who organizes these events regularly in this region. You work in this area to make sure that the awareness of the hostages remains high, and here we are on day 600 at the Sha'ar Negev intersection. What is the purpose of the day 600 demonstrations? What are you doing today?
We're doing what we're doing for 600 days. We're just here to remind and to remember and to explain to everyone that we need the hostages back home. This is the key for everything. The key for Israel, and the key for Gaza people, if you want, and the key for the whole Western world, if you want. We are standing on blooded ground. This is a place that October 7, there was body lying around all over the place, and people kidnapped from here. So this is different. I'm running a rally every Saturday.
Avi, let me ask you about these. There's an installation being put together as we're talking. People have bags full of yellow rocks that I will also show in video and pictures. What's this installation meant to signify?
Okay, the yellow color, it's from the yellow ribbon and the symbol of the hostages. And a lot of organization came here today to bring and brought this stuff here. And we want every little thing that we do and people see makes a difference. So this now it's yellow stones. You can people come and write above them the name of the hostages or whatever they want, and this is going to be all around this area of the square of the junction. This evening we are going to stand like we're standing in right now, but a lot of people will come, and also some of the hostages' families. And we're going to say a few words, and afterwards we're going to stand in quiet, in silent for 10 minutes. It's 600 seconds. because they are in 600 days of silence.
600 days of pure hell. Thank you for all the work you do. Avi, really appreciate it, and I'll see you later tonight. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Yon Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.